My son gave his father-in-law a $22,000 luxury trip to Dubai for Father's Day. The whole restaurant applauded. Then he turned to me, his own flesh and blood, and tossed a crumpled envelope onto the tablecloth. Inside was a generic card and a scratch-off lottery ticket worth $1.50. He laughed and told me to keep my hands busy because I was too old to need real money. He did not know that the ticket he bought as a joke was about to change the entire power dynamic of our family. He did not know that by the time I finished my cold steak, I would be the most powerful man in the room, and he would be nothing more than a bad investment I was about to liquidate. But before I tell you how luck smiled on me and how I exposed their dirty little secrets, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps this old engineer share his story. Tell me in the comments, what is the worst gift you have ever received from a family member? I am reading every single one. The air inside the Golden Steer Steakhouse in Chicago was thick with the smell of seared prime rib and expensive cologne. It was the kind of place where the waiters wore tuxedos and the menu did not have prices because if you had to ask, you could not afford it. I sat at the end of the booth, feeling like a ghost in my own life. I was wearing my charcoal suit, the one I bought in 1998 for my retirement party from the structural engineering firm. It was a good suit, Italian wool, but it had grown tight around the waist and loose around the shoulders. It smelled faintly of mothballs and history. To my right sat my son, Jason. He was 40 years old, wearing a tailored navy blazer and a watch that cost more than my first car. He looked successful. He looked like the man I had raised him to be, but his eyes were empty. They darted around the room, checking to see who was watching him, who was admiring him. He was a performance, not a person. Across from me sat Richard Sterling, my son's father-in-law. Richard was everything I was not. He was loud, bronzed from a tanning bed, and wore his hair dyed a shade of black that did not exist in nature. He called himself a venture capitalist. I called him a liability. He was currently loudly complaining to the sommelier that the $200 bottle of Cabernet needed to breathe more. And then there was Brittany, my daughter-in-law. She was scrolling through her phone, barely acknowledging my existence. She had not looked me in the eye since we arrived. I was just a prop to them, a necessary inconvenience for the Father's Day photo opportunity. Jason tapped his glass with a silver fork. The sharp sound cut through the ambient noise of the restaurant. "Attention, everyone," Jason announced, his voice booming a little too loudly. He wanted the neighboring tables to hear. "Today is about honoring the patriarchs, the men who built the legacy we stand on." He turned his body fully toward Richard. He did not even glance at me. "Richard," Jason said, his voice dripping with admiration. "You have been a mentor, a guide, and a second father to me. Your business acumen is legendary. Brittany and I wanted to give you something that matches your status." He pulled a thick gold foil envelope from his inside pocket and slid it across the white tablecloth. Richard picked it up with manicured fingers, tearing it open with theatrical slowness. He pulled out a glossy brochure and a set of flight vouchers. Richard let out a low whistle. Emirates First Class. 7 nights at the Burj Al Arab in Dubai. The Royal Suite. The table erupted. Brittany clapped her hands together, squealing with delight. Even the couple at the next table looked over in envy. Jason beamed. $22,000, Richard. But you are worth every penny. We know you need to relax before your next big merger. Richard leaned back, puffing out his chest. You kids shouldn't have. But you know me. I do love the desert in the summer. He looked at me, a smirk playing on his lips. Henry, do not be jealous, old sport. Maybe next lifetime, right? I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. It was not jealousy. I did not want to go to Dubai. I did not want their money. It was the principle. It was the engineering of the insult. I looked at Jason, my son, the boy whose diapers I had changed, the boy whose fever I had cooled with wet rags at 3 a.m. when his mother, my beloved Martha, was too exhausted to move. Then, it was my turn. Jason turned to me. His smile faded slightly, replaced by a look of pity mixed with annoyance. "And for you, Dad," he said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a plain white envelope. It was already crumpled at the corner, as if he had sat on it. He tossed it onto the table. It did not slide like the gold one. It just landed with a pathetic little thap sound next to my water glass. I opened it. My hands were trembling, just a little. Not from age, but from a rage I was struggling to suppress. Inside was a generic card from a gas station rack. It said, "Happy Father Day." The apostrophe was missing. He had not even signed it. Tucked inside the card was a single scratch-off lottery ticket. The price printed in the corner was $1.50. I looked up at him. I tried to find a trace of shame in his eyes. I found none. "What is this, Jason?" I asked, my voice steady. Jason laughed, picking up his wine glass. "It is a game, Dad. You know, scratch and win. I figured you are retired now, sitting around that little apartment all day. You need something to keep your hands busy." Brittany chimed in, not looking up from her phone. "Yeah, Henry. Plus, what would you even do with a big gift? You are retired. You do not have bills. You do not travel. You are basically done. Basically done." The words hung in the air like smoke. I looked down at the ticket. $1.50. My mind, the mind of a chief engineer who had designed bridges that withstood hurricanes, began to calculate. I remembered the year Jason got into Harvard. I had sold my collection of vintage motorcycles, the one thing I did for myself, to pay his first semester. I remembered the down payment on his first condo. $200,000. I had taken it from my 401k, taking a tax penalty, just so he would not have to pay mortgage insurance. I remembered when he started his business. I gave him the seed money, $50,000. I never asked for it back. I never asked for equity. I calculated the total investment I had poured into this boy over 40 years. It was well over $500,000. And the return on investment sitting on the table before me was $1.50. "Jason," I said quietly, "this is a scratch-off ticket." He rolled his eyes. "I know what it is, Dad. Do not look so ungrateful. You might win $5. That is a free coffee." Richard let out a bark of laughter. "Come on, Henry. Where is your sense of adventure? Maybe you will hit the jackpot and finally buy a suit that fits." The table laughed. Jason laughed. Brittany laughed. I felt the blood rushing to my ears. It was not the cheapness of the gift. If he had written me a letter, just a letter saying, "Thank you for everything, Dad," I would have framed it and treasured it until my dying day. If he had given me a framed photo of us fishing together when he was 10, I would have cried tears of joy. But this was not a gift. This was a message. The message was clear. You are obsolete. You are cheap. You are a joke. We value the flashy, fake venture capitalist father-in-law at $22,000. We value the quiet, sacrificing biological father at $1.50. The taillights of Richard's Range Rover disappeared around the corner, dissolving into the gray mist of the Chicago afternoon, and with them went the last shred of my dignity. I stood alone on the curb outside the steakhouse, the rain tapping a steady, mocking rhythm against the shoulders of my suit. A valet parker, a young man who looked about the same age Jason was when I bought him his first car, stepped forward and asked if I needed a taxi. I shook my head and told him I preferred to walk. It was a lie, of course. I did not prefer to walk 3 blocks in a freezing drizzle with arthritic knees, but a taxi back to my apartment would cost $30. And after the check I had just written for my share of the lunch, my bank account balance was hovering in the double digits. I tightened my scarf, the one Martha had knitted for me 2 Christmases before she passed, and turned my collar up against the wind. The walk to the bus stop felt like a pilgrimage of shame. I passed shop windows displaying watches that cost more than my entire yearly pension, and I saw happy families inside warm cafes, laughing over pastries. I kept my head down, focusing on the cracks in the sidewalk. As a structural engineer, I had spent 40 years looking for cracks, for weaknesses in the concrete that could bring a whole bridge down. Now, walking through the rain, I realized I had been so busy inspecting the infrastructure of the city that I had failed to inspect the foundation of my own family. I had poured all my concrete, all my reinforcement steel, into Jason, and now I was seeing the structural failure right before my eyes. The bus shelter was empty, a plexiglass box scarred with graffiti and smelling of damp cigarettes. I sat on the metal bench, the cold seeping through my trousers instantly. I checked the schedule. The number 12 bus was due in 4 minutes. I sat there shivering slightly, listening to the hiss of tires on wet asphalt. My hand brushed against the pocket of my jacket, and I felt the crinkle of paper. The gift. The insult. I pulled the envelope out. It was already damp from the rain. I opened it and took out the card, tossing it into the trash can next to the bench without a second glance. It was the ticket I held onto. $1.50, the price of a bad cup of coffee. I looked at the bright, garish colors of the lottery ticket. It promised a platinum life, printed in bold gold letters. It was almost comical. Here I was, 78 years old, wet, cold, and abandoned by my own son on Father's Day, holding a piece of cardboard that promised to change my destiny. I did not believe in luck. I believed in physics, in load calculations, in yield strength. Luck was just a variable for people who did not do the math. But I had 10 minutes to kill, and sitting there staring at the rain was only making the silence in my head louder. I reached into my trouser pocket and fished out the quarter. It was a 1964 Washington quarter, silver, heavy, and worn smooth by years of worry. Martha had found it on the sidewalk the day we got engaged. She called it her lucky charm. After she died, I carried it everywhere. It was the only part of her I could still touch. I held the coin between my thumb and forefinger, feeling the raised profile of the president. Martha would have laughed at this. She would have told me to scratch the ticket, just for the thrill of it. For her, I thought. I placed the ticket on my briefcase, which rested on my lap, and began to scratch. The gray latex coating flaked away under the silver edge of the coin, revealing the numbers underneath. I worked methodically, from left to right, just as I used to review blueprints. I was not hoping for anything. I just wanted to see the losing numbers so I could throw the thing away and get on the bus with empty pockets. The first winning number required was 7. I looked at my numbers. The first one was 12. No match. I kept scratching. The second required number was 14. I scratched the second spot on my line. 14. I paused. A match. Probably a $2 winner, I thought. Just enough to get my money back. I kept going. The third winning number was 22. I scratched the third spot. 22. My hand stopped moving. 2 matches was unusual. I felt a small flicker of curiosity, nothing more. I scratched the fourth winning number. 38. I looked at my line. 38. The flicker became a small flame. The odds of 3 matches were slim. I looked around the empty bus shelter, suddenly feeling exposed. A car drove by, splashing water onto the sidewalk, but I barely noticed. I focused entirely on the small square of paper. The final winning number was 45. I took a breath, the cold air filling my lungs, and scratched the last spot on my line. The gray dust fell away. The number 4 appeared, then the number 5. 45. I sat frozen. The coin slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the concrete, but I did not reach for it. My eyes were locked on the prize box below the matching numbers. I had matched all 5. I knew the game. I knew the odds. I slowly, carefully, scratched the prize area. I expected to see a trick, maybe a free ticket, maybe $50. The latex curled away to reveal a word, not a number. Jackpot. And below it, in smaller print, the payout amount for the Platinum Life Series. $4.5 million. The sound of the world seemed to drop away. The traffic noise, the rain, the distant sirens, it all vanished into a high-pitched ringing in my ears. I felt a sudden, sharp pressure in my chest, and for a terrifying second, I thought I was having a heart attack. My vision tunneled. I gasped for air, clutching the ticket so hard my knuckles turned white. This was not joy. This was trauma. This was a physical blow to the system. $4.5 million. I closed my eyes and forced myself to breathe. In, out, in, out. Calculate the load. Distribute the stress. I opened my eyes. The numbers were still there. They had not changed. The bus pulled up to the curb with a screech of air brakes, the doors folding open with a mechanical clatter. The driver, a heavy-set man with tired eyes, looked at me. "You getting on or what, buddy?" he asked. I blinked, snapping back to reality. "Yes," I said, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. I scrambled to pick up Martha's quarter from the ground, then shoved the ticket deep into my inside breast pocket, buttoning the jacket over it. I stepped onto the bus, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. The bus was nearly empty, just a teenager with headphones in the back, and a woman with grocery bags in the middle. I walked past them, paranoia seizing my brain. Did they know? Could they see it on my face? I sat near the back, clutching my briefcase against my chest, creating a barrier between the world and the secret burning against my ribs. The ride to the suburbs took 45 minutes. Usually, I spent this time reading the newspaper or watching the city change from the steel skyscrapers of the Loop to the brick bungalows of the working-class neighborhoods. Today, I saw nothing. My mind was racing at 1,000 miles an hour. 4.5 million. That was more than I had earned in my entire career. It was freedom. It was a new house. It was travel. But then the image of Jason's face at the restaurant flashed in my mind. The smirk. The way he tossed the ticket at me like I was a beggar. The way he looked at Richard with adoration and at me with pity. He had given me this ticket because he thought it was worthless. He thought I was worthless, if he knew. Oh God, if he knew. I imagined calling him right now. "Jason, I won." I imagined his voice changing, the sudden warmth, the fake excitement. I imagined Brittany suddenly finding room in the Range Rover to come pick me up. The thought made bile rise in my throat. I looked out the window as the bus rolled through my neighborhood. It was a place of peeling paint and overgrown lawns, where people worked hard but never got ahead. I got off at my stop and walked the 2 blocks to my building. It was a 3-story walk-up, red brick that had turned black with soot. The front door lock was broken, as usual. I climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, my heart pounding not from the exertion, but from the weight of the paper in my pocket. I unlocked my apartment door and stepped inside. The air was stale, smelling of old carpet and boiled vegetables. I flipped the light switch, and the single bulb in the hallway flickered before buzzing to life. I walked into the living room. It was small, furnished with the few pieces I had kept after selling the big house. My recliner, worn at the arms, a small television, a bookshelf filled with engineering texts. On the ceiling, a brown water stain had been spreading for months, looking like a map of a country that did not exist. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of tap water. My hands were shaking so bad I spilled half of it on the counter. I pulled the ticket out of my pocket and laid it on the chipped laminate table. There it was. The escape hatch. I could leave this place tomorrow. I could check into the Four Seasons. I could buy a villa in Tuscany. I could buy Richard Sterling's life 10 times over. But then I looked at the photo on the fridge. It was me, Martha, and Jason at his college graduation. We looked so happy. I had been so proud. How did we get from there to the Golden Steer Steakhouse? How did my son become a stranger who measured love in dollar signs? I realized then that the money was dangerous. If I cashed this ticket now, if I told Jason, I would never know the truth. I would never know if he loved me, or if he just loved what I could give him. He had already drained my savings. He had taken my house. He had taken my pride. If I gave him this, he would take it too, and I would be left with nothing but a checkbook and a hole in my heart. I sat down at the small table, the silence of the apartment pressing in on me. The rain tapped against the window, softer now. I took a sip of water. The engineer in me took over. A structure must be tested before it can be certified. You apply a load. You check for deflection. You see if it holds or if it buckles. I needed to test the structure of my relationship with my son one last time. I needed to apply a load and see what happened. I needed to know if the rot I saw today was just on the surface, or if it went all the way to the core. I looked at the ticket, then at the phone on the wall. I would not call the lottery commission yet, not tomorrow. Tomorrow, I would make a different kind of call. I would ask for help. I would ask for a fraction of what I had given. And the answer I got would determine the fate of every single dollar sitting on this table. I folded the ticket carefully, wrapped it in a plastic sandwich bag to keep it dry, and hid it inside the hollowed-out pages of my old structural dynamics textbook. Then I sat in the dark, listening to the rain, and waited for the sun to rise on the day of judgment. I sat at my kitchen table for 3 hours before I made the call. The morning sun was trying to push through the grime of the single window in my kitchenette, casting long, dusty beams across the cracked linoleum floor. The lottery ticket was still hidden inside the structural dynamics textbook, wrapped in plastic, sitting on top of the refrigerator. I had not slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the numbers. $4.5 million. It was enough to fix everything. It was enough to buy a new life. But before I could build a new foundation, I had to know if the old one was truly beyond repair. I needed to know if my son was just thoughtless, or if he was heartless. There is a difference. Thoughtlessness can be corrected with a conversation. Heartlessness is a structural flaw that cannot be fixed. I practiced what I was going to say. I rehearsed the tremble in my voice. It was not hard to find. I was an old man living in a box, abandoned by the people I had sacrificed everything for. The tremble was always there, waiting just below the surface of my pride. I needed a scenario that was urgent but solvable, a problem that $500 could fix. $500 was nothing to Jason. He spent that on a bottle of wine. He tipped valets more than that in a month. If he could not spare $500 for his father's health, then he could not be trusted with the truth of my fortune. I picked up the phone. It was an old landline. The plastic yellowed with age. I dialed his number. It rang, and rang, and rang. I imagined him looking at the screen, seeing the word Dad, and sighing. I imagined him debating whether to send me to voicemail. Finally, on the 6th ring, the line clicked open. "What is it, Dad?" Jason answered. "No hello, no happy Father's Day for yesterday. Just impatience." I could hear wind rushing in the background, the distinct, crisp sound of a driver hitting a golf ball, a smattering of applause. He was on the course. It was Monday morning, a workday for most people, but apparently not for my son. "Jason," I said, letting my voice crack just enough. "I am sorry to bother you at work." "I am not at work," he snapped. "I am entertaining clients. This is important, Dad. Make it quick." I took a deep breath, clutching the phone cord with my free hand. "It is my heart, Jason. I have been having these pains. Chest pains. I went to the urgent care clinic this morning. I waited for the concern. I waited for him to ask if I was okay, if I needed a ride, if I was scared." "And," Jason said. His voice was flat. "The doctor is worried," I continued, sticking to the script even as my stomach turned. "He thinks it might be a blockage. He wants to do an MRI immediately to see if I need a stent. But my insurance, Jason, you know the policy is basic. They will not cover the copay for the scan up front." "How much?" Jason interrupted. He did not ask about the blockage. He asked about the price. $500, I whispered. "I just need $500 to get the scan, son. I will pay you back when my pension check comes in next week. I promise. I am scared, Jason. It hurts." There was a silence on the other end. In the background, I heard a familiar booming laugh. "Richard." "Who is that, Jason?" Richard's voice drifted through the phone. "Is that the old man? Tell him we are losing daylight. It is your turn to punt." "It is just my dad," Jason said, his voice muffled as if he was holding the phone against his chest. "He wants money. Again." My heart hammered against my ribs, and this time the pain was real. He told Richard I wanted money. Not that I was sick. Not that I needed help. Just that I was a beggar. Jason came back on the line. "Listen, Dad. I cannot help you right now. The timing is terrible." "It is $500, Jason," I pleaded, pushing him. "I am in pain." "Look, do you have any idea how much cash I just dropped on this Dubai trip?" he shouted, his voice raising so I knew he was performing for Richard. "I am tapped out. I have cash flow issues until the next quarter. I cannot just be your ATM every time you have a hypochondria attack." "Hypochondria?" I gripped the edge of the table. "So you are saying no?" I asked. "You are saying you will not help me?" "I am saying I cannot," he hissed. "If you are that desperate, look around that apartment. You must have something you can pawn. What about that watch? The one Mom gave you. That old Omega. It is vintage. You could probably get $500 or $600 for it at a pawn shop. Sell that if it is so important." The world stopped. The air left the room. He told me to sell the watch. The watch was a Seamaster from 1968. Martha had saved for 2 years to buy it for me when I got my license as a professional engineer. She had given it to me with a note that said, "So you always know it is time to come home to me." I had worn it every day for 50 years. It was the one thing I had refused to sell when I liquidated my assets to fund Jason's business. He knew that. He knew it was the holy grail of my life. And he told me to sell it to pay for a medical scan that he could cover with the cash in his wallet right now. "Jason," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "That is your mother's watch." "Yeah, well, Mom is gone, Dad," he said coldly. "And you are still here, bothering me. Be practical. Sell the watch or wait for your pension. I have to go." "Richard is waiting." The line clicked dead. I sat there with the receiver held to my ear, listening to the dial tone. It was a harsh, rhythmic drone, like the flatline monitor in a hospital room. In a way, someone had died. The son I thought I had, the boy I made excuses for, the young man I hoped would one day grow up. He was dead. He had died the moment he told me to sell Martha's memory to save my own life. I slowly lowered the phone back to the cradle. My hand was shaking, but not from age. It was shaking from a potent mixture of grief and rage. I looked down at my wrist. The steel of the watch was scratched and worn, the crystal slightly fogged at the edges, but the second hand swept smoothly around the dial. Tick, tick, tick. Time was moving forward. I looked around the apartment. The water stain on the ceiling, the peeling wallpaper, the empty refrigerator. Jason was right about one thing. Mom was gone, and I was here. But he was wrong about everything else. I was not helpless, and I was certainly not broke. I stood up. My knees popped, but I did not feel the pain. I walked to the bathroom and looked in the mirror. The face staring back at me was gray and tired. My eyes were red-rimmed. I looked like a victim. I turned on the cold water tap and splashed my face. I scrubbed the skin hard, as if I could wash away the pathetic old man who had just begged his son for $500. I grabbed a towel and dried my face roughly. When I looked in the mirror again, something had changed. The sadness in the eyes was gone, replaced by the cold, hard calculation phone of an engineer who has identified a critical failure and knows exactly how to demolish the structure. I walked back into the bedroom. I opened the closet. I pushed aside the moth-eaten sweaters and the worn-out slacks. In the back, inside a plastic garment bag, hung my best suit. It was a navy blue Brooks Brothers suit, older but classic. I had saved it for my funeral. I pulled it out. "Not today," I said to the empty room. I dressed slowly, methodically. I put on a crisp white shirt, starching the collar. I tied my tie with a double Windsor knot, tight and symmetrical. I put on the suit. It fit a little loose, but with my shoulders squared, it looked commanding. I polished my shoes until they shone. Finally, I fastened the Omega watch back onto my wrist. I walked to the kitchen and retrieved the textbook. I pulled out the sandwich bag. The ticket was there. The numbers had not changed. I put the ticket in my inside pocket, right next to my heart, just like yesterday. But today, it did not feel heavy. It felt like ammunition. I picked up the phone again. I dialed a number I had looked up in the phone book the night before. Sarah Jenkins, attorney at law. A receptionist answered. "Law office, how may I direct your call?" "I need to speak to Ms. Jenkins," I said. My voice was deep, resonant. The tremble was gone. "I am sorry, sir. Miss Jenkins is fully booked today. Is this regarding a new case?" "Tell her it is Henry Caldwell," I said. "Tell her I have a structural emergency regarding an estate worth $4.5 million, and tell her I need to execute a blind trust before the close of business today." There was a pause. I could hear the receptionist typing furiously. "One moment, please, Mr. Caldwell." I waited. I looked at the dust motes dancing in the sunlight. Jason wanted me to be practical. He wanted me to sell the past to pay for the future. Well, I was going to be very practical. I was going to use the future to bury him. Sarah Jenkins came on the line. Her voice was sharp, professional. "Mr. Caldwell, you mentioned a blind trust." "I did," I said. "I am coming to your office. I have the ticket, and I have a plan. But I need a shark, Miss Jenkins. My son thinks I am a minnow. I need to show him that I am the one who owns the ocean. I can make time for you at 11 o'clock, she said. "I will be there," I said. I hung up the phone. I grabbed my umbrella, not because it was raining, but because a gentleman always carries one. I walked out of the apartment, locking the flimsy door behind me. I did not look back at the water stain or the cracked floor. I was never coming back to this life. As I walked down the stairs, I thought about Jason on the golf course, laughing with Richard, thinking he had successfully brushed off the old nuisance. He had no idea that the nuisance was currently walking toward a bus stop with a nuclear warhead in his pocket. He had failed the test. And now, he was going to pay the tuition. The glass doors of the Jenkins and Associates law firm were heavy, the kind that required a purposeful push to open. I pushed them with the hand that was not clutching my umbrella, stepping from the humid Chicago street into the climate-controlled silence of the 42nd floor. The receptionist was a young woman with a headset who looked at my frayed collar and scuffed shoes with a polite, practiced dismissal. She asked if I was delivering a package. I told her I was the package and that Sarah Jenkins was expecting me. When I walked into Sarah's office, the view took my breath away. Not because it was beautiful, but because it looked down on the city I had helped build, reducing the cars and people to insignificant specks. It was a perspective of power, and for the first time in years, I felt like I belonged there. Sarah Jenkins was younger than I expected, perhaps in her late 30s, with eyes that were sharp and assessing. She did not offer me coffee. She did not make small talk about the weather. She sat behind a desk made of glass and steel and asked me simply what kind of structural emergency required a blind trust before 5 o'clock. I sat down and placed my checkbook on the desk. It contained my life savings, $7,000. It was money I had been hoarding for a medical emergency, for a nursing home, for the inevitable decline. I pushed it toward her. "This is my retainer," I said. "It is everything I have. I need you to protect me, and I need you to help me disappear." Sarah looked at the check, then up at me. She did not touch it. She asked me what I was protecting myself from. I reached into my inside pocket, past the beat of my anxious heart, and pulled out the plastic sandwich bag. I slid the lottery ticket onto the glass surface. The colors seemed too bright in this monochromatic room. Sarah picked it up. She looked at the numbers. She looked at her computer screen. She looked back at the ticket. Her expression did not change, but her posture did. She sat up straighter. She was no longer looking at a tired old man in a cheap suit. She was looking at a client worth $4.5 million. We spent the next hour building a fortress. We created the paperwork for a blind trust, an entity that would claim the prize on my behalf so that the name Henry Caldwell would never appear in the newspapers. We named it the Martha Foundation, after my wife. It felt right. Martha was the one who always protected us, and now, even in death, she would be the shield between me and the vultures. But a blind trust requires a clean financial history. Sarah explained that to set up the tax structure correctly, she needed to see the full picture of my assets. She needed to know where every dime came from and where it went. I told her it would be a short conversation. I had my pension, my Social Security, and a 401k retirement account that I had not touched in 5 years. I gave her the login information for the retirement account. I had handed control of it over to Jason 5 years ago, when my eyes started getting bad and the online interfaces became too confusing. He had told me he would manage it, shift the investments to conservative bonds, make sure it grew safely so I would never have to worry. I trusted him. He was my son. He had a degree in business. I sat back in the leather chair, watching Sarah type, feeling a sense of relief. It was almost over. I was almost safe. Then the clicking of the keyboard stopped. The silence in the room changed. It became heavy, charged with a static electricity that made the hair on my arms stand up. I looked at Sarah. She was staring at the screen, her brow furrowed in a deep frown. She clicked the mouse once, twice. Then she looked at me, And for the first time I saw pity in her eyes, not the dismissive pity of the receptionist, but the heartbreaking pity of someone witnessing a disaster. "Mr. Caldwell," she said softly, "when was the last time you reviewed the statements for this account?" I told her I had not seen them in years. Jason told me he went paperless to save the environment. He told me the balance was steady. Sarah turned the monitor around so I could see. The screen was filled with rows of numbers. Red numbers. I leaned forward, squinting. I saw withdrawals. Not big, flashy withdrawals that would trigger a fraud alert, but small, steady bleeds. $2,000 here. $3,000 there. They were labeled as management fees. Consulting retainers. Administrative costs. I looked at the dates. A withdrawal of $4,000 on the day I told Jason I could not afford to fix my car's transmission. A withdrawal of $2,000 the week I ate instant noodles because I was short on grocery money. I felt a coldness spread through my chest, freezing my lungs. "How much is left?" I asked. My voice sounded hollow, like wind blowing through an empty tunnel. Sarah highlighted the total at the bottom. $17,000. I stared at the number. There should have been over $400,000 in that account. It was the money from the sale of the big house. It was the money from 40 years of overtime. It was the money intended to pay for my care so I would never be a burden to anyone. It was gone. "Where did it go?" I whispered. Sarah pointed to the recurring payee on the transaction list. The name was listed next to every single unauthorized withdrawal for the last 3 years. Sterling Ventures, LLC. The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the arms of the chair to keep from falling off the earth. Sterling. Sterling was not a common name. It was the last name of the man who sat across from me yesterday. The man who drank $200 wine while I drank water. The man who received a $22,000 trip to Dubai. Richard Sterling. I closed my eyes, and the pieces of the puzzle slammed together with the force of a wrecking ball. The sudden friendship between Jason and Richard. The business partnership. The way Jason looked at him with such desperation. Jason was not just trying to impress his father-in-law. He was funneling my life savings into Richard's pockets. They were stealing from me. My son was stealing from me. He was taking the money I had saved by skipping lunches, by wearing old clothes, by denying myself every small pleasure, and he was giving it to a man who wore gold rings and dyed his hair. I felt a tear leak out of my eye, hot and stinging. It was not a tear of sadness. It was a tear of pure, molten rage. Sarah turned the monitor back. She reached across the desk and placed her hand on mine. Her hand was warm, firm. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, her voice dropping the professional distance. "This is not just mismanagement. This is embezzlement. This is elder financial abuse. And judging by the frequency of these transfers to a shell company, I would bet my law license that this is part of a larger scheme." She looked at me, her eyes blazing. "We can file a report right now. We can have him arrested before dinner." I looked at her. I thought about Jason. I thought about the baby I held in my arms. I thought about the boy I taught to ride a bike. And then I thought about the man who told me to sell my dead wife's watch because he had cash flow issues. He did have cash flow issues. His cash flow was my blood, and he had sucked me dry. "No," I said. My voice was quiet, terrifyingly calm. "Arresting him is too easy. If we arrest him now, he will play the victim. He will say it was a mistake. He will say he was trying to help me invest." I stood up. I walked to the window and looked down at the city. The rain had stopped, and the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the streets. "I want to know everything," I said to the glass. "I want to know about Sterling Ventures. I want to know how deep this hole goes. Because if Richard Sterling is taking my money, he is taking money from others too. Men like him are bottomless pits. I turned back to Sarah. She was watching me, waiting. Ms. Jenkins, I said, you are the best in the city. Can you find out the truth about Richard Sterling? Can you find out what they are really doing with my money? Sarah smiled. It was a shark's smile. Cold, predatory, and exactly what I needed. I have a private investigator on retainer, she said. His name is Mike. He used to be a forensic accountant for the FBI. If Richard Sterling has a single unpaid parking ticket, Mike will find it. If he is running a shell game, Mike will blow the house down. Do it, I said. Spend whatever it takes. Use the retainer. Use the winnings. I don't care. Sarah picked up her phone. She dialed a number, her eyes never leaving mine. Mike, she said into the receiver, I have a job for you. Priority 1. We are going hunting. She hung up. I sat back down. The shock was fading, replaced by a cold, hard determination. I looked at the lottery ticket on the desk. It was no longer just a ticket. It was a warrant. Jason thought I was a confused old man who needed help managing his affairs. He thought I was blind. But he forgot one thing. I was an engineer. I knew how to read a blueprint. And now that I had seen the blueprint of his betrayal, I knew exactly where to place the explosives to bring the whole structure down. I looked at Sarah. When the trust is set up, I said, I want you to prepare one more document for me. What is it? She asked. A power of attorney, I said. But not for Jason. For you. Because when this explodes, I want to make sure my hands are clean. Sarah nodded. Consider it done. I walked out of the office an hour later. The city lights were turning on, a million little stars fighting back the darkness. I felt lighter. I had lost a son today. I had lost the illusion of a family. But I had gained an alliance. And for the first time in a long time, I was not just surviving. I was hunting. And the prey had no idea that the old lion they left in the rain had just sharpened his claws. 2 days later, I sat in the leather chair across from Sarah Jenkins again, but the atmosphere in the room had shifted entirely. The first time I was there, I was a desperate client holding a lottery ticket like a life raft. Now I was the captain of the ship, and Sarah was my first officer. The air conditioning in the high-rise office hummed with a low, steady vibration that reminded me of the tension in a steel cable just before it snaps. We were waiting for Mike. Sarah had told me he was the best private investigator in Chicago, a former forensic accountant for the FBI, who could follow a paper trail through a shredder if he had to. When the heavy oak door finally opened, Mike walked in. He did not look like a television detective. He looked like a tired math teacher wearing a rumpled brown suit and carrying a leather satchel that looked like it had survived a war. He did not smile. He nodded at Sarah, shook my hand with a grip that felt like sandpaper, and sat down. He placed a thick manila folder on the glass desk. The sound it made was heavy. It was the sound of a judge's gavel hitting the bench. It was the sound of a coffin lid closing. I looked at the folder. It was labeled simply Sterling Ventures. I felt a cold sweat prickle on the back of my neck. I wanted to open it, but I also wanted to run out of the room and never come back. I wanted to go back to thinking my son was just selfish, not criminal. But I am an engineer. I deal in facts. I deal in reality, no matter how ugly it is. Mike opened the folder. He spread photographs and bank statements across the glass surface like he was laying out a tarot card reading from hell. Henry, I am going to be direct with you. Mike said, his voice gravelly and low. Richard Sterling is not a tycoon. He is not a venture capitalist. He is a ghost. I leaned forward, looking at the first document. It was a bankruptcy filing from 3 years ago. Chapter 7. Liquidation. Richard Sterling has been legally bankrupt for 36 months. Mike continued, pointing a calloused finger at the paper. He lost everything in a bad real estate gamble in Florida. His mansion in Lake Forest is in foreclosure. He hasn't paid the mortgage in a year. He is squatting in his own house using delay tactics in court to keep the bank from kicking him out. The Bentley he drives is leased under a shell company, and he is 3 months behind on payments. The suits, the watches, the dinners at the Golden Steer. It is all a costume, Henry. He is drowning, and he is pulling everyone down with him. I stared at the paper. The man who had laughed at my $1.50 gift. The man my son worshipped. He was a beggar in a gilded mask. But if he is broke, I asked, my voice trembling, how is he surviving? How is he paying for Dubai? Mike pulled out a second stack of papers. These were spreadsheets, complex webs of transactions that made my eyes hurt. This is where it gets worse, Henry. Richard is running a classic Ponzi scheme. He brings in new investors, promising them massive returns on imaginary tech startups. He takes their money and uses it to pay off the older investors, just enough to keep them quiet, and he uses the rest to fund his lifestyle. It is a house of cards, Henry. And your son is the one holding the glue. My son. The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. I looked at the next document. It was a transfer authorization. I recognized the signature instantly. It was Jason's. It was shaky, slightly slanted, just like it was when he signed his report cards in 3rd grade. Jason is not just a victim here, Mike said, looking me in the eye. He is an accomplice. We tracked the $400,000 from your retirement account. It went into Sterling Ventures, and then it immediately went out to pay for the lease on Richard's car and to pay off a threatening investor from New York. Your life savings, Henry. It didn't go into an investment. It went into the gas tank of a Bentley and the pocket of a loan shark. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. My son stole the money I saved from 40 years of sweating on construction sites to pay for his father-in-law's car. Why, I whispered. Why would he do that? Jason isn't stupid. He has a business degree. He must know. Mike slid a glossy piece of paper across the desk. It looked like a corporate org chart, but it was crudely made, probably in PowerPoint. At the top was Richard Sterling, CEO. And right below him, connected by a bold black line, was a photo of Jason. Underneath his name, it read, Executive Vice President of Global Strategy. This is why Mike said softly, ego. Richard promised Jason the world. He promised him a title. He promised him that once the big deal comes through, Jason would be the heir to the empire. Jason is desperate to be important, Henry. He is desperate to be a big shot like Richard pretends to be. He sold you out for a fake title at a fake company. I looked at the photo of my son. He was smiling that fake corporate smile, wearing a suit I bought him. Vice President of Global Strategy. It was pathetic. It was a lie wrapped in a fantasy. He was not a vice president. He was a bagman. He was the fool carrying the water for a con artist. And the Dubai trip, Sarah asked, her voice sharp. What is that about? Mike sighed and rubbed his temples. That is the darkest part. Dubai isn't a vacation. Richard is out of new investors in Chicago. People are starting to ask questions. The well is dry. He is going to Dubai to meet with a group that specializes in high-risk financing. Essentially, money laundering. He is trying to get a massive influx of dirty cash to plug the holes in his scheme before the FBI catches on. And he is taking Jason with him to sign the papers. He is setting your son up to be the fall guy, Henry. If this deal goes south or if the feds intervene, Jason's name will be on the documents. Richard will claim he was just an advisor, and your son will go to federal prison for international wire fraud. I sat back in the chair. The silence in the room was deafening. I looked at the view of the city again. I had built bridges in this city. I had calculated load limits to ensure safety. I had spent my life preventing collapses. And while I was looking at blueprints, my own family had collapsed into a sinkhole of greed and stupidity. My anger, which had been a hot burning fire, began to cool. It crystallized. It hardened into something cold and sharp like a diamond cutter. I was no longer a hurt father. I was an engineer looking at a structural failure that needed to be demolished before it killed anyone else. So my son is a thief, I said, my voice steady, devoid of emotion. And he is a fool. And he is about to become a felon. Unless we stop him, Sarah said. We can go to the police now, Henry. With this evidence, they will arrest Richard tonight. And Jason, I asked. Sarah hesitated. Jason is deeply involved, Henry. He signed the transfers. He embezzled your funds. If we go to the police, he will be arrested too. He will likely face charges. I looked at the dossier again. I looked at the evidence of my son's betrayal. He had not just stolen my money. He had stolen my trust. He had looked me in the eye when I asked for $500 for a heart scan and told me to sell his mother's watch. He was willing to let me die to protect his lie. I closed the folder. The sound was soft final. No police yet, I said. Not until after the weekend. Sarah looked surprised. Henry, why wait? They are leaving for Dubai in 3 days. Because I said, standing up and buttoning my jacket. I want to look him in the eye one last time. I want him to think he has won. I want him to hold that lottery ticket in his hand and believe that he has finally gotten everything he wanted. I want to lift him up to the highest peak before I let him fall. I turned to Mike. Can you get me hard copies of all of this? The bankruptcy, the Ponzi scheme flowchart, the transfer records. Everything. Mike nodded. I can have a full presentation ready by Saturday. Good, I said, because on Saturday I am throwing a party, a victory party. Jason wants to celebrate my good fortune. He wants to announce to the world that the Caldwell family is rich. I am going to give him exactly what he wants, a stage, an audience, and a spotlight. I walked to the door. I paused with my hand on the handle. Mike, Sarah, thank you. You have done good work. Now it is my turn. I walked out of the office and into the elevator. As the numbers counted down to the lobby, I did not feel old. I did not feel weak. I felt dangerous. Jason had called me a clueless old man. He thought I was just a piece of furniture in his life. He was about to learn that the foundation is the most important part of the house. And when the foundation decides to move, the whole house comes crashing down. I walked out into the cool night air. I had a dinner to plan. I had a trap to set. And for the first time in years, I knew exactly what I was doing. The engineer was back on the job, and the demolition was scheduled for Saturday night. Saturday arrived with a heavy, humid heat that made the air in my apartment feel like wet wool. I spent the morning cleaning, not because I expected my guests to appreciate it, but because an engineer prepares the site before the demolition begins. I wiped down the cracked laminate counters and swept the worn carpet, but I left the water stain on the ceiling untouched. It was part of the stage design. It was a testament to the poverty they thought I lived in. At 4 o'clock, I took the lottery ticket out of its hiding place. I did not put the real ticket on the table. I was not careless. Earlier that day, I had gone to a high-end print shop and made a high-resolution color photocopy of the winning scratch-off. It looked perfect. The colors were vibrant, the scratched-off latex looked jagged and real, and the barcode was crisp. I placed this piece of paper on the center of my small, wobbly coffee table. Next to it, I placed a bottle of sparkling wine I had bought at the discount store for $6. It was warm because my refrigerator was on the fritz again. The tableau was set, a fortune sitting next to failure. I took out my phone and typed the message I had rehearsed in my head a dozen times. Jason, come over for dinner tonight around 7. I have good news. I hit send. I did not beg. I did not say please. I just cast the line and waited. The response came 3 minutes later. It was not a yes. It was a demand for clarification. What kind of news, Dad? We have plans, I typed back. Just come. It is important. Then I put the phone away and sat in my armchair, in the dim light, waiting for the sharks to smell the blood in the water. They arrived at 7:45. They were 45 minutes late, and they did not apologize. I heard the rumble of the Range Rover outside before I heard the knock. When I opened the door, the look on their faces told me everything I needed to know about my place in their lives. Jason was wearing a polo shirt that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and he looked annoyed, his jaw set in a tight line. Brittany was standing behind him, holding a designer purse over her nose as if the air in my hallway was toxic. She looked around the corridor with wide, exaggerated eyes, taking in the peeling paint and the flickering bulb. "Hi, Dad," Jason said, stepping inside without hugging me. "We cannot stay long. We have a reservation at Nobu at 9. So whatever this news is, can we speed it up?" Brittany stepped in gingerly, walking on her toes, as if she was afraid the floorboards would stain her heels. "It smells like boiled cabbage in here, Henry," she said, wrinkling her nose. "You really should let us hire a cleaning service for you. Or maybe just open a window." I closed the door, blocking out the fresh air. I wanted the atmosphere to be stifling. I wanted them to be uncomfortable. It makes people careless. "I am sorry about the smell, Brittany," I said, playing the part of the apologetic old man. "The ventilation is not what it used to be. Come in, sit down." I put out some crackers. They walked into the living room. They did not sit. They stood in the center of the room, looking out of place like two diamond statues in a landfill. Jason checked his watch again. He was agitated, tapping his foot. He looked at the small television. He looked at the water stain. He looked everywhere except at me. "So what is the news, Dad?" Jason asked. "Did you finally decide to sell the watch? Because if you did, I know a guy who can give you a fair price." I looked at him. He was still trying to strip me of my assets even now. "No, Jason," I said softly. "I did not sell the watch. But something happened. Something unexpected." I gestured vaguely toward the coffee table. "I bought a bottle of champagne," I said, "to celebrate." Jason looked down at the table. He saw the $6 bottle of sparkling wine. He let out a short, cruel laugh. "Dad, that is not champagne. That is carbonated sugar water. If that is your big news that you splurged $6 on bad wine, then we are leaving. This is ridiculous." Brittany sighed, loud and dramatic. "Come on, Jason, let us go. This is sad." They turned to leave. My heart hammered against my ribs. Had I miscalculated? Was their disdain so strong that they would not even look at the bait? "Wait," I said. "Just look at the card." Jason stopped. He turned back slowly, annoyance radiating off him in waves. "What card, Dad?" "The one on the table," I said, pointing a trembling finger. "Next to the bottle." Jason rolled his eyes. He stepped forward and looked down. He saw the photocopy of the lottery ticket lying there amidst the crumbs of the crackers. "Another scratch off, Dad, seriously," he said, shaking his head. "Is this what this is about? You won $5 and you dragged us across town." "Just look at it," I whispered. "Please." "I need a glass of water," I said abruptly, turning away from them. "My throat is dry." I walked into the small kitchenette, which was separated from the living room by a half wall. I turned on the faucet, letting the water run loudly. But I did not drink. I stood in the shadow of the refrigerator, watching them through the gap in the wall. This was the moment. The predator thinks he is alone. The predator thinks the prey has left the clearing. In the living room, Jason stood over the table. He looked bored. He reached down and picked up the paper with 2 fingers, as if it were a dirty tissue. Unbelievable, he muttered to Brittany. He calls us over here for a lottery ticket. He probably won $50 and thinks he is Warren Buffett. Brittany laughed, checking her reflection in the darkened TV screen. Just humor him, babe. Tell him congratulations so we can get to the restaurant. I need a martini. Jason looked at the ticket. He scanned it casually. Then he stopped. I saw his posture change. It was subtle at first. A tightening of the shoulders, a tilt of the head. He brought the paper closer to his face. He squinted. He looked at the numbers. 7, 14, 22, 38, 45. He looked at the matching numbers scratched off below. He froze. Brittany, noticing his silence, turned to look at him. What, she asked. Did he win enough for dinner? Jason did not answer. He was staring at the paper as if it were a burning bush. His mouth opened slightly. He blinked rapid fire. He looked from the ticket to the cheap bottle of wine, then back to the ticket. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. His fingers were moving fast now, flying across the screen. I knew exactly what he was doing. He was typing in the name of the lottery game. Platinum Life. He was searching for the winning numbers from Sunday night. I held my breath in the kitchen. The water was still running, but the sound seemed miles away. Jason looked at his phone. Then he looked at the ticket in his hand. Then he looked at his phone again. Oh my God, he whispered. It was a sound I had never heard from him. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated shock. What, Brittany asked, stepping closer, her annoyance replaced by curiosity. Jason, what is it? Jason grabbed her arm, his grip tight. Look at this, he hissed, shoving the ticket and his phone in her face. Look at the numbers, Brittany. Look at the payout code. Brittany looked. She frowned, trying to make sense of it. Then her eyes went wide. Her hand flew to her mouth. No, she gasped. Is that real? It matches, Jason said, his voice rising in pitch. It matches perfectly. 7, 14, 22. Every single number. He scrolled down on his phone. Jackpot. He read aloud, his voice trembling. $4.5 million. The silence that followed was heavy. It was the silence of a vacuum sucking the oxygen out of the room. They looked at each other, and in that look I saw the terrifying transformation I had anticipated. The boredom was gone. The disgust was gone. In their place was a hunger so raw it was almost animalistic. Their pupils were dilated. They were not looking at a piece of paper. They were looking at a mansion. They were looking at a yacht. They were looking at their salvation from the financial hole they had dug. 4.5 million, Brittany whispered. That is everything. That is Dubai. That is the foreclosure. That is everything. Jason looked toward the kitchen. He did not know I was watching. He looked at the hallway where the old man had disappeared. His face shifted. The annoyance melted away, replaced by a mask of desperate, frantic affection. He is clueless, he whispered to Brittany. He bought $6 wine. He has no idea what this is worth. He probably thinks he won a few thousand. He is going to screw it up, Brittany hissed, clutching Jason's lapel. He is senile, Jason. He will lose the ticket. Or he will give it to some charity. Or he will let the state take half in taxes because he does not know how to claim it. Jason nodded, his eyes gleaming with a predatory light. We cannot let that happen. We have to help him. Help him? Brittany asked, raising an eyebrow. Manage it, Jason said. We have to manage it for him. He trusts me. He gave me his retirement account, didn't he? He will give me this too. He looked down at the ticket again. The paper trembled in his hand. $4.5 million, he said again, savoring the words like a fine steak. I turned off the faucet. I took a deep breath. I picked up a glass of tap water. My hand was steady. I was no longer the father. I was the executioner. I walked back into the living room, my face arranged into a mask of confused innocence. "Sorry about that," I said, shuffling my feet. "Old pipes. The water takes a while to run clear." I looked at them. They were standing exactly where I had left them, but they were different people now. They were vibrant. They were energized. They were fake. "Did you look at the ticket?" I asked, sitting down heavily in my armchair. "I think I won something. Maybe enough to fix the ceiling." The transformation was instantaneous and terrifyingly absolute. Watching my son drop to his knees on my stained carpet was like watching a man possessed by a sudden religious fervor. But his God was not in heaven. His God was printed on that piece of paper. Jason clutched my legs, burying his face against my knees in a gesture of intimacy that felt more like an assault than an embrace. He looked up at me and his eyes were wet, swimming with a mixture of relief and manic joy. "You see, Dad," he stammered, his voice cracking. I told you my hands were lucky. I picked this ticket out. I felt it when I handed the cashier the money. I knew this was the one. We did this. We are rich. We." The word hung in the humid air of the apartment like a toxic cloud. Less than 48 hours ago, I was an embarrassment he had left on a curb in the rain. I was a financial drain he wanted to plug. Now, suddenly, we were a team again. We were a collective entity. The swiftness with which he rewrote history to include himself in my fortune was breathtaking. He was not just claiming the win. He was claiming authorship of the entire event. Brittany was moving now, too. The woman who had looked at my apartment as if it were a contagious disease was suddenly making herself at home. She sat on the arm of my tattered recliner, her expensive white dress pressing against the grime I had not bothered to clean. She reached out and began to massage my shoulders, her fingers digging into my trapezius muscles with a possessiveness that made my skin crawl. Her perfume, a heavy floral scent that usually signaled her disdain, now felt like a suffocating blanket. "Oh, Henry," she cooed, her voice dropping an octave into a register she reserved for wealthy clients and small children she wanted to impress. "You must be in shock. Look at you. You are trembling. This is too much for one person to process. You cannot stay here tonight. Not with a ticket like this in the house. It is not safe. The neighborhood is dangerous. Anyone could break in." I looked at her, fighting the urge to shake her hand off my shoulder. The neighborhood had not changed in the last hour. The only dangerous element in this room had arrived in a Range Rover 45 minutes ago. "You are right, Brittany," I said, allowing my voice to quiver, leaning into the role of the overwhelmed patriarch. "I feel a little dizzy. I never expected this. I just thought it was a game." Jason squeezed my knee, his grip tight and frantic. "It is not a game anymore, Dad. This is life-changing. This is generational wealth. But we have to be smart. We have to be so smart." He stood up then, pacing the small room, his energy too big for the space. He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes darting from the ticket to the window to the door. "There are sharks out there, Dad," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You have no idea. As soon as this news gets out, people will come out of the woodwork. Scammers, con artists, long-lost relatives. They will try to trick you. They will try to confuse you with legal jargon and tax loopholes." He stopped pacing and stood directly in front of me, blocking out the light from the hallway. He loomed over me, casting a shadow that felt cold despite the heat of the room. "You are 78 years old, Dad," he said, his tone softening into a patronizing concern that was more insulting than his previous anger. You have been out of the business world for a long time. You do not know how these things work anymore. The tax implications alone are a nightmare. Federal taxes, state taxes, lump sum versus annuity. If you check the wrong box, you could lose half of it instantly. Do you know how to file a Form 5754? Do you know how to set up a blind trust to protect your identity? I sat there, looking up at him. I knew exactly how to do those things because I had just paid Sarah Jenkins $7,000 to do them for me. I knew more about the structure of this prize than he ever would, but I blinked rapidly, letting my mouth hang open slightly, feigning the confusion he so desperately wanted to see. Form what? I asked weakly. I do not know about forms, Jason. I just scratched the numbers. Exactly, Brittany interjected, sliding off the arm of the chair to kneel beside Jason, creating a wall of unified concern. You should not have to worry about forms, Henry. You have worked hard your whole life. You deserve to enjoy this, not to be stressed out by lawyers and accountants who just want to bill you by the hour. She took my hand in hers. Her skin was soft, manicured, a stark contrast to my calloused palms. Let Jason handle it, she said. He is a businessman. He deals with millions of dollars every day. He knows how to protect assets. He manages your retirement account, doesn't he? And look how well that has gone. He has kept you safe all these years. The mention of the retirement account sent a spike of adrenaline through my veins. The audacity was staggering. She was using his theft as a resume for his future crimes. She was using the fact that he had drained my life savings as proof that he should be trusted with my jackpot. It took every ounce of my self-control not to laugh in their faces. It was a dark, hysterical laughter bubbling in my chest, born of pure disbelief at the depth of their moral depravity. So, what should I do? I asked, looking from one to the other. Jason leaned in close, his eyes locking onto mine. You need a representative, Dad. You need someone with legal standing to act on your behalf. We need to go to a lawyer, my lawyer, and sign a power of attorney. Just a limited one, specifically for the lottery claim. It authorizes me to file the claim, handle the taxes, and deposit the funds into a secure account that I will set up for us. For us. There it was again. I do not know, Jason, I said, looking down at my hands. A power of attorney sounds serious, like I am giving up control. It is not giving up control, he said quickly, a flash of panic crossing his face. It is delegating the stress. Dad, think about it. Do you really want to stand in line at the lottery commission? Do you want reporters shouting your name? Do you want your face on the 6 o'clock news so every criminal in Chicago knows where you live? If I do it, I take the heat. I take the risk. I am doing it to protect you. He paused, and then played his ace card. Besides, Dad, look at you. You said yourself you are tired. You have been having those chest pains. The stress of this. It could be dangerous for your heart. Do you really want to risk your health over paperwork when you have a son who loves you and wants to carry that burden for you? He used my heart against me. He used the lie I told him on Monday, the lie he had ignored when he thought I was poor, and repurposed it as a weapon to disarm me now that he thought I was rich. It was masterfully cruel. I looked at Brittany. She nodded encouragingly, a beatific smile plastered on her face. Please, Dad, she said. Come home with us. We have the guest suite ready. It is the one with the garden view. You love that room. We can have a nice dinner, pop a real bottle of champagne, and just relax. We will take care of everything in the morning. I looked around my apartment. I looked at the water stain. I looked at the photocopy of the ticket on the table, the bait that had lured the rats out of the walls. I knew that if I went with them, I was walking into the belly of the beast. I knew that the moment I signed that paper, they would discard me. They would put me in the cheapest nursing home they could find, or perhaps just ignore me until I died, while they spent my millions in Dubai. But I also knew that to catch them, really catch them, I had to let them think they had caught me. I had to let the trap snap shut around my own leg so that I could drag them down with me. I sighed, a long, rattling exhalation that sounded like surrender. "You are right," I said quietly. "I am too old for this. I do not understand the taxes. I do not want the reporters." Jason exhaled, his shoulders dropping 2 inches. "Thank God," he whispered. "That is the smart decision, Dad. That is the engineer talking. Logical. Practical." I looked at him. Yes, I thought. This is the engineer talking, and I am calculating the failure point of this entire structure. "Okay," I said. "I will do it. I will sign the papers. You handle the money, Jason. You have always been good with numbers." Jason beamed. He stood up and clapped his hands together. "Okay, great. We are doing this. Brittany, grab Dad's bag. Dad, where is the real ticket? We need to get it and get out of here." "It is in the kitchen," I said, pointing. "Inside the Bible on top of the fridge." Jason practically ran to the kitchen. I heard him moving things around. I heard the rustle of pages. Then I heard a shout of triumph. "Got it!" he yelled. He came back into the room holding the plastic bag containing the original ticket. He held it up to the light, inspecting it like a diamond merchant. "It is beautiful," he whispered. He slipped it into his inside jacket pocket. The same pocket where he kept his wallet. The wallet that contained my credit cards. "Okay, let's go," he said, his voice commanding and brisk. "We are leaving this dump. Tonight, the Caldwells ride in style." Brittany helped me up from the chair. Her grip was firm, guiding me, steering me. I leaned on her, letting my weight drag a little. "Thank you, Brittany," I mumbled. "You are very kind." "That is what family is for, Henry," she said. We walked out of the apartment. I did not lock the door. There was nothing left in there of value. The only things of value were walking down the stairs, a $4.5 million ticket, and the undeniable proof of my son's treachery. As I climbed into the back seat of the Range Rover, the leather soft and cool against my back, I caught Jason's eye in the rearview mirror. He was smiling at himself. He looked like a king. I settled back and closed my eyes. "Enjoy the ride, son," I thought, "because the crash is coming, and you are not wearing a seatbelt." The morning sun filtered through the high windows of the guest suite, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, but it brought no warmth to the room. I had spent the night in what Jason called the garden suite, a sterile, over-decorated room that smelled of lavender and neglect. It was the kind of room you put a guest in when you wanted them to feel impressed but not comfortable. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands resting on my knees, listening to the house wake up. I could hear the distant clatter of the coffee machine, the muffled sound of Brittany scolding a housekeeper, and the heavy footsteps of my son pacing in the hallway. Today was the day of the execution, though they believed it was the day of their coronation. They were coming for my signature. They were coming to take legal control of the fortune they believed I was too incompetent to manage. I adjusted my tie in the mirror. The knot was perfect. The face staring back at me was composed, but I practiced the tremor in my lower lip one last time. I needed to look like a man overwhelmed by the weight of his own luck, a man looking for a strong shoulder to lean on. I needed to be the burden they so desperately wanted to exploit. The door opened without a knock. Jason walked in, followed closely by a man I had never seen before. This stranger was short, balding, with a suit that was slightly too shiny and a briefcase that looked like it had been purchased at a discount outlet. He had the shifting, nervous eyes of a man who made his living navigating the gray areas of the law. "Good morning, Dad," Jason said, his voice brisk and efficient. "I hope you slept well. We have a lot to get through today. This is Mr. Thorne. He is my personal attorney. He handles all of my special contracts." Thorne stepped forward, extending a hand that was damp with sweat. "A pleasure, Mr. Caldwell," he said, his voice oily. "Congratulations on your windfall. Truly remarkable." I shook his hand weakly, letting my grip remain limp. "Thank you," I said, making my voice sound thin. "It is all very confusing." I woke up thinking it was a dream. "It is not a dream, Henry," Thorne said, opening his briefcase on the antique writing desk. "But reality comes with paperwork. The state requires very specific documentation to process a claim of this magnitude without triggering an audit. Jason tells me you want to avoid the press." I nodded vigorously. "Oh, yes. No reporters. I cannot handle the noise." "Exactly," Jason said, stepping in to loom over me. "That is why we need to sign the power of attorney immediately. It authorizes me to file the claim anonymously on your behalf. It creates a shield, Dad. It puts me in the line of fire so you can stay safe here in the garden suite." Thorne slid a thick stack of documents across the desk. The paper was heavy, the font small and dense. At the top, in bold letters, it read, "General Durable Power of Attorney." I knew exactly what that document was. I had reviewed a similar one with Sarah Jenkins just 24 hours ago. A general durable power of attorney gave the agent, in this case Jason, complete control over my finances, my property, and my health care. He could empty my bank accounts, sell my car, and even commit me to a mental institution if he deemed it necessary. It was not a shield. It was a pair of handcuffs. I sat down at the desk. I put on my reading glasses, taking my time to clean the lenses with a handkerchief. I saw Jason check his watch. I saw Thorne tap his pen against his leg. They were impatient. They wanted the kill. "This is a lot of pages," I said, squinting at the first paragraph. "Do I have to read all of it?" Thorne laughed, a nervous hacking sound. "Oh, that is just standard legal boilerplate, Mr. Caldwell. It just says that Jason is your son and he is helping you. You do not need to bore yourself with the fine print." I turned the page slowly, wetting my finger. "It says here," I mumbled, pointing to a random clause, "revocation upon death." What does that mean? Does that mean if I die, Jason keeps the money? Jason sighed, a loud, exasperated sound. "Dad, nobody is dying. It is just legal talk. It means the money stays in the family. Isn't that what you want?" I looked up at him. "I want to be safe, Jason." "You are safe," he snapped. "Just sign the damn paper, Dad. The lottery commission closes at 4. We need to file this today." I picked up the pen. It was a heavy, expensive fountain pen. I held it over the signature line. My hand began to shake. I let the tremor travel from my wrist to my elbow. The pen tip hovered over the paper, making small ink blots. I cannot steady my hand," I said, my voice rising in panic. "I am too nervous, Jason. What if I sign it wrong? What if they reject it?" "Let me help you," Thorne said, reaching out to guide my hand. "No," I shouted, pulling back. "I need a moment. My heart is racing again." I dropped the pen. It rolled off the desk and skittered under the bed. "Oh dear," I said. "I am so clumsy." Brittany, who had been watching from the doorway, let out a groan of frustration. "I will get it," she hissed. She walked over in her tight pencil skirt and had to get down on her hands and knees to fish the pen out from the dust bunnies. I watched her. The woman who thought she was royalty was crawling on the floor at my feet. It was a petty victory, but I savored it. She slapped the pen back onto the desk. "Sign it, Henry," she said, her voice lacking its usual sweetness. "We are trying to help you, but you are making it very difficult." Just then, the door swung open again. Richard Sterling strode in. He was wearing a white linen suit and a pink shirt, looking like a caricature of a plantation owner. He beamed at me, his teeth blindingly white. "Henry, my friend," he boomed. "I heard we were having some technical difficulties." Richard walked over and placed a hand on my shoulder. It felt heavy and possessive. "Jason tells me you are worried about the future," he said, his voice dropping to a soothing baritone. "And you should be. 4.5 million is a lot of money to the average man. But in my world, Henry, it is just seed capital." He pulled a chair up and sat knee to knee with me, ignoring the lawyer and Jason. "I have been running the numbers, Henry," Richard said. "If you sign that paper and let Jason transfer the funds to Sterling Ventures, do you know what I can do for you? I have an algorithm, high-frequency trading in emerging markets. I can turn that 4.5 million into 20 million in 18 months. He paused for effect, waiting for me to gasp. 20 million, I repeated, keeping my face blank. 20 million. Dollars, Richard enunciated. You could buy a private island. You could buy a hospital wing. You could leave a legacy that would last for 500 years. Why settle for a comfortable retirement when you can have an empire? I looked at him. I looked at the desperation behind his tan. He needed my money to pay off his investors. He needed my money to stay out of prison. He was promising me the moon while standing in a crater. That sounds risky, Richard, I said. There is no risk when you are the house, Henry, he winked. And we are the house. I looked at Jason. He was nodding fervently. Trust him, Dad. Richard is a genius. He is doing this for us. For us. I took a deep breath. I picked up the pen again. I looked at the document. Power of attorney. Okay, I said softly. I trust you, son. I trust you, Richard. I do not want to be a burden. I just want to rest. I lowered the pen to the paper. This time I did not let my hand shake. I signed my name clearly and firmly. Henry Caldwell. Jason let out a breath he must have been holding for 10 minutes. Thorne snatched the paper away the moment the ink was dry, as if afraid I would erase it. Done, Jason said, a grin breaking across his face. It is done. He looked at Brittany. She pumped her fist silently. Richard clapped me on the back so hard I nearly pitched forward. Smart man, Henry, Richard said. You just made the best decision of your life. They began to gather the papers, their movements frantic and joyous. They were already spending the money in their heads. They were already in Dubai. They were already laughing at the old man they had tricked. But as I sat there, watching them high-five each other, I felt a calm satisfaction settle in my chest. Because they did not know what I knew. They did not know that yesterday afternoon, sitting in Sarah Jenkins' office, I had already signed a different document. I had signed the deed of assignment transferring the physical lottery ticket to the Martha Foundation Trust. The ticket was no longer my property. It belonged to a legal entity that I controlled, but technically did not own personally. When I signed that power of attorney just now, I gave Jason control over my personal assets. And my personal assets currently consisted of a checking account with $42 in it, a wardrobe of old suits, and a toaster oven. I had given them the keys to an empty vault. They thought they had just stolen a kingdom. In reality, they had just signed a receipt for nothing. Jason, I said, interrupting their celebration. He turned to me, his smile wide and genuine for the first time in years. Yes, Dad. Anything. Now that we are Partners, I said. I have one request. Name it, he said magnanimously. You want a new car, a condo in Florida. No, I said. I want a party. A party? Jason asked, confused. Yes, I said, standing up. I felt stronger now. The act was nearing its end. I want to announce this properly. I want to celebrate with my family and friends. I want you to invite everyone, your business partners, Richard's investors, the people at the country club. I want to stand up in front of them and tell them exactly what you have done for me. I want to tell them how you handled everything. I saw the gears turning in Richard's head. A party meant an audience. An audience meant potential investors. If Henry stood up and publicly vouched for Jason and Richard, if he announced he was investing millions with them, it would be the ultimate endorsement. It would bring in fresh capital. It would buy Richard another year of his Ponzi scheme. I think that is a fantastic idea, Richard boomed. A gala, a black tie event. We will host it at the grand ballroom of the hotel on Saturday. We will announce the formation of the Caldwell-Sterling Partnership. Jason looked at Richard, then at me. He saw the opportunity to show off. He saw the chance to play the benevolent son. Okay, Dad, Jason said. You got it. Saturday night. We will make it the event of the season. Thank you, I said. I want to be proud of you, Jason. I want everyone to know who you really are. I will make you proud, Dad, he said. You will see. They left the room in a whirlwind of energy, phones already out, dialing caterers and event planners. Thorne lingered for a second, shoving the useless power of attorney into his briefcase, then scurried after them. The door clicked shut. The silence returned to the garden suite. I walked over to the window and looked out at the manicured lawn. I imagined the party. I imagined the lights, the music, the champagne. I imagined Jason standing on stage, thinking he was the king of the world, and I imagined the moment I would take the microphone. I smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a structural engineer who has just identified the perfect stress point, planted the dynamite, and is now simply waiting for the timer to reach zero. You want a show, Jason? I whispered to the empty room. I will give you a show, but you are not going to like the ending. The grand ballroom of the Drake Hotel shimmered under the light of crystal chandeliers that looked like frozen explosions of glass. It was Saturday night, and the room was filled with the specific kind of people Richard Sterling attracted. They were people who wore too much jewelry and laughed too loudly at unfunny jokes. They were desperate for connection, desperate for opportunity, and desperate to be seen near money. Jason had spared no expense. He had charged $50,000 to his credit cards in the last 3 days, believing that the Martha Foundation Trust would reimburse him on Monday morning. The centerpieces were towering arrangements of white orchids. The champagne was vintage Dom Perignon. A string quartet played in the corner, their music barely audible over the roar of egos in the room. I sat at a small table near the back, nursing a glass of sparkling water. I wore my old tuxedo, the one I had bought 30 years ago. It was a little tight across the chest, but I had refused Jason's offer to buy me a new one. I wanted to be myself tonight. I wanted to be Henry Caldwell, not the puppet they thought they had dressed up. I watched my son work the room. He looked handsome, I had to admit. He moved with the easy grace of someone who believes he has won the lottery of life. He held a crystal flute in one hand and gestured expansively with the other, telling anyone who would listen about his new role. I could hear snippets of his conversations drifting over the crowd. Yes, my father is very fortunate, but you know he is elderly. I have taken over the portfolio management. We are looking at significant international expansion. Dubai is just the beginning. He was selling a future he did not own, paid for with money he would never see. Brittany was by his side looking radiant and predatory in a silver gown that hugged every curve. She was showing off a new diamond bracelet, likely another charge on the credit card, telling the wives of potential investors about the charitable foundation we were allegedly starting. "Oh yes, Henry is so sweet," she said, her voice tinkling like broken glass. "He just wants to give back. But Jason and I will be directing the philanthropic strategy. We want to focus on global initiatives." Global initiatives. They meant Richard's pocket. Speaking of Richard, he was the king of this court. He stood near the stage surrounded by a group of wealthy-looking men who hung on his every word. He looked flushed, triumphant. He was telling them about the algorithm, about the guaranteed returns, about the exclusive opportunity to get in on the ground floor before the Caldwell capital hit the market. He was harvesting them. He was using my name, using the rumor of my fortune, to squeeze one last drop of blood from these stones before the whole thing collapsed. I looked at my watch. 7:55. The doors at the back of the room opened quietly. Most people didn't notice. They were too busy watching Richard. But I noticed. Sarah Jenkins walked in wearing a sharp black suit that made her look like an executioner. Beside her was Mike, the private investigator, looking uncomfortable in a tie but alert. And behind them were two men I had never met, but recognized instantly by their posture. They stood tall, scanning the room with eyes that missed nothing. They were not hotel security. They were federal agents. Sarah caught my eye across the crowded room. She gave a barely perceptible nod. It was time. The string quartet stopped playing. A hush fell over the room as Richard tapped the microphone on the stage. Feedback whined for a second, then cleared. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard boomed his voice, filling the cavernous space. "Thank you for joining us on this momentous occasion. Tonight we celebrate not just luck, but vision. We celebrate the union of capital and courage." He paused for applause. The room clapped politely. Jason stood next to him, beaming like a lighthouse. "My dear friend and family member, Henry Caldwell, has been blessed with a windfall." Richard continued, gesturing vaguely toward where I sat. "But wealth without wisdom is just waste. That is why tonight I am proud to announce that Sterling Ventures will be the exclusive managing partner for the Caldwell estate. Together, we will build a legacy that will rival the Rockefellers." More applause. Louder this time, fueled by the champagne and the promise of easy money. And now Richard said, sweeping his arm wide, "I would like to invite the man of the hour, my son-in-law Jason Caldwell, to say a few words about our exciting future." Jason stepped up to the microphone. He looked out at the crowd, his face glowing with pride. "Thank you, Richard," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, everyone. You know, my father is a simple man. He worked hard all his life, but he never really understood the power of high finance. When he won this money, he was scared. He asked me, 'Jason, what do I do?' And I told him, 'Dad, trust me. Trust family.' And tonight, he has done just that. He has entrusted me with his future, and I promise you I will not let him down." I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the floor. Heads turned. I adjusted my jacket. I picked up my glass of water, and I began to walk toward the stage. The crowd parted for me. They whispered as I passed. "That is him. That is the winner. He looks so frail." I walked up the stairs to the stage. Jason saw me coming. He looked surprised but quickly recovered, putting on his mask of benevolent concern. "Ah, here he is," Jason said, reaching out a hand. "Dad, do you want to say something? You do not have to. I can handle it." I ignored his hand. I walked past him and stood in front of the microphone. I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw the greed. I saw the envy. I saw the superficiality. And then I looked at my son. I looked at Richard. I tapped the microphone. It was on. "Thank you, everyone, for coming here tonight to celebrate the colossal stupidity of my son." The words left my lips and hung in the air like a poisonous gas. The polite applause that had been rippling through the room died instantly, replaced by a silence so profound I could hear the hum of the air conditioning vents overhead. Jason, who had been standing a few feet away with a glass of champagne raised halfway to his mouth, froze. His smile did not disappear immediately. It curdled, twisting into a confused grimace as his brain tried to process whether this was a joke he did not understand. Richard Sterling, standing near the edge of the stage, dropped his hands to his sides, his eyes darting around the room to gauge the reaction of his potential investors. Jason took a step toward me, his laughter forced and brittle. "That is a good one, Dad. Always with the dry humor." He tried to reach for the microphone, his hand trembling slightly, but I pivoted, shielding the stand with my body. I was not done. I looked out at the sea of faces, the wealthy and the wannabes, and I saw their confusion turning into fascination. They sensed a disaster, and there is nothing high society loves more than watching a public execution. "I am not joking, Jason," I said, my voice booming through the speakers, devoid of any warmth. "I am an engineer. I deal in facts, and the fact is, you are not a businessman. You are a thief, and you are not even a good one." Jason lunged then. He dropped his glass, the sound of shattering crystal punctuating the tension, and rushed toward me. "Dad, stop this! You are confused! Get off the stage!" He was shouting now, panic stripping away his composure. But before he could touch me, the spotlight that had been focused on us suddenly cut out, plunging the stage into semi-darkness. At the same moment, the massive projection screen behind me, which had been displaying the gold and black logo of Sterling Ventures, flickered and changed. Mike had timed it perfectly. A harsh white light flooded the room from the screen. It was not a celebratory video. It was a document. Blown up to the size of a billboard, every line and decimal point was visible to the back of the room. It was a bank statement. My retirement account statement. The room gasped. It was a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the ballroom. "Look closely," I commanded, pointing a steady finger at the screen behind me. "You see those withdrawals? The ones labeled management fees, the ones labeled consultation retainers. Those are not investments. That is my life savings, $400,000, being siphoned out of my account by my son, Jason Caldwell, without my knowledge or consent." Jason stopped in his tracks. He stared up at the screen, his face draining of all color until he looked like a wax figure melting under the heat. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. I signaled to the back of the room, and the image changed. Now, it was a complex diagram, a web of red lines connecting Sterling Ventures to a series of offshore shell companies and personal accounts. "And this," I said, turning to look at Richard, whose tan seemed to have turned a sickly shade of gray. "This is where the money went. It did not go into tech startups. It did not go into emerging markets. It went to pay the lease on a Bentley. It went to pay the mortgage on a foreclosure. It went to pay off the previous investors who were threatening to go to the police." I looked back at the crowd. "Richard Sterling is not a venture capitalist," I declared. "He is running a Ponzi scheme. And he is broke. The only capital he has left is the money my son stole from me to buy his affection." Pandemonium broke out. Men in tuxedos began shouting. A woman in the front row dropped her purse. Richard Sterling looked like a trapped animal. He spun around, looking for an exit, but the doors were blocked. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "He is lying!" Richard screamed, his voice cracking. "He is a senile old man. He does not know what he is talking about. This is slander. I will sue you. I will ruin you." I did not flinch. I waited for him to stop screaming. "You want to sue me, Richard?" I asked calmly. "With what money? You have nothing, and you are about to have even less." The screen changed one last time. This was the coup de grace. The image was a scanned letter on official stationery from the State Lottery Commission. It was dated 2 days ago. The text was short and brutal. It confirmed that the winning ticket for the Platinum Life jackpot, in the amount of $4.5 million, had been claimed. But the claimant was not Henry Caldwell, and it was certainly not Jason Caldwell. The claimant listed was the Martha Caldwell Charitable Foundation for Domestic Abuse Victims. I watched Jason read the words. I watched his eyes scan the lines, searching for a loophole, searching for his name. I saw the exact moment his soul broke. He collapsed, not figuratively, but literally. His knees gave out and he fell onto the stage floor, staring up at the screen as if it were his tombstone. "Where is the money?" he whispered, his voice picked up by the microphone I was still holding. "Dad, where's the money?" I looked down at him. I felt a ghost of the love I used to have for him, but it was cold and distant, like looking at a photograph of a stranger. "It is gone, Jason," I said. "I donated it. All of it. Every single cent." The room went silent again, stunned by the magnitude of the revelation. "You see," I continued, addressing the room, "my son and his wife thought they could trick me into signing a power of attorney. They thought they could take control of my fortune, but they forgot to check who actually owned the ticket. I transferred the ticket to the foundation days ago. When I signed your papers this morning, Jason, I was signing over control of nothing. The ticket you have in your pocket, the one you think makes you a king, is just a piece of paper. It is trash. Just like the card you gave me for Father's Day." Jason let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the ticket. He stared at it, his hands shaking so violently the paper rattled. "No!" he wailed. "No, this is real. This is $4 million. You cannot give it away. It is mine. It is ours." "It was never yours," I said. "You told me I was worth $1.50, so I decided to prove you wrong. I decided my dignity was worth $4.5 million, and I bought it back." Richard Sterling suddenly lunged at Jason. "You idiot!" he roared. "You told me he was stupid. You told me we had the money. You signed the contracts." Richard grabbed Jason by the lapels of his expensive tuxedo and began to shake him. "I need that money," he screamed. "They are going to kill me if I do not pay. That is enough." The voice cut through the chaos like a knife. The 2 men in black suits who had been standing by the doors stepped onto the stage. They moved with the heavy, inevitable momentum of a landslide. They were not hotel security. They pulled badges from their jackets. "FBI," the lead agent announced. "Nobody move." Richard Sterling froze. He released Jason and raised his hands, his face a mask of terror. "Richard Sterling," the agent said, pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. "You are under arrest for securities fraud, wire fraud, and operating a criminal enterprise." The agent spun Richard around and slammed him against the podium. The click of the handcuffs ratcheted through the silent room. The second agent walked over to Jason, who was still kneeling on the floor, clutching the worthless lottery ticket to his chest. "Jason Caldwell," the agent said, "you are under arrest for embezzlement, elder financial abuse, and conspiracy to commit fraud." Jason looked up. He looked at the agent, then he looked at me. His eyes were wide and wet, like a child who has scraped his knee. "Dad," he pleaded. "Dad, do not let them take me. I am your son. Please, I will pay you back. I swear. Just tell them it was a mistake. Tell them you gave me permission." I looked at him. I remembered the phone call. I remembered begging him for $500 for a heart scan. I remembered him telling me to sell Martha's watch. I pulled up the sleeve of my tuxedo jacket. I tapped the crystal face of the Omega watch. "You told me to be practical, Jason," I said softly. "You told me to sell this watch Because you had cash flow issues. Well, I am being practical. I am cutting my losses. Jason began to weep, loud, ugly sobs that echoed in the ballroom. The agent pulled him to his feet and cuffed his hands behind his back. Suddenly, there was a commotion near the side exit. Brittany. She had been standing in the shadows, watching her world disintegrate. Now, she was trying to run. She had kicked off her high heels and was sprinting toward the service door, clutching her diamond bracelet. She did not make it. A uniformed police officer stepped through the door and blocked her path. She screamed, a high-pitched shriek of entitlement denied. "Get your hands off me!" she yelled as the officer took her arm. I did not do anything. It was them. It was Jason. I am just the wife. I did not sign anything. I leaned into the microphone one last time. "Actually, Brittany," I said, "my lawyer has the text messages where you instructed Jason on how to hide the withdrawals. And we have the emails where you set up the fake consulting invoices. You are not just a wife. You are a co-conspirator." She stopped struggling. She looked across the room at me. Her face twisted into a snarl of pure hatred. "I hope you die alone, old man," she spat. I smiled. It was a sad smile, but it was genuine. "I might die alone, Brittany," I said, "but I will die with a clean conscience, and I will die free, which is more than any of you can say." The agents began to lead them away. The crowd parted, watching in stunned silence as the architects of their own destruction were marched out in shame. Jason looked back at me one last time before he disappeared through the doors. He looked small. He looked broken. He looked like the little boy who used to cry when he broke a toy, expecting me to fix it. But some things cannot be fixed. Some structures are too damaged to be saved. They have to be demolished so the ground can be cleared. I took the microphone stand and lowered it. I placed it gently on the floor. I looked at Sarah Jenkins and Mike, who were standing in the wings. Sarah gave me a small, proud smile. I nodded to her. I walked down the stairs of the stage. The crowd stared at me. Some looked ashamed. Some looked in awe. I did not care about any of them. I walked through the center of the ballroom, my head held high, the old tuxedo tight across my chest, but my heart feeling lighter than it had in 20 years. I walked out of the hotel and into the night. The air was cool and smelled of rain. I hailed a taxi. The driver was an old man, about my age. "Where to, pal?" he asked. I touched the pocket where I used to keep the lottery ticket. It was empty now, and it felt wonderful. "Take me to the airport," I said. "I have a plane to catch. I hear Santorini is beautiful this time of year." The taxi merged into traffic, leaving the lights of the city behind. I did not look back. I had exposed everything. I had paid my debts, and now, finally, my life was my own. 3 months have passed since the night the lights went out on my son's delusions of grandeur. I was sitting on a terrace carved into the cliffs of Oia on the island of Santorini. The sun here does not just shine, it embraces you. It reflects off the whitewashed walls and the blue domes of the churches, creating a light so pure it feels like it could cleanse the soul. Below me, the Aegean Sea stretched out like a sheet of hammered sapphire, calm and endless. I was sipping a cup of mountain tea sweetened with local honey, listening to the wind chime dancing in the breeze. It was a perfect moment, a moment of absolute peace. And then my phone buzzed. I looked at the screen. It was a number I did not recognize with a correctional facility area code. I hesitated for a moment, my thumb hovering over the decline button. I did not have to answer. I had no legal obligation to ever speak to the inmate on the other end again. But the engineer in me needed to confirm that the demolition was complete. I needed to verify that the debris had settled. I swiped right and held the phone to my ear. "Hello, Jason," I said. My voice was calm, steady, indistinguishable from the sound of the ocean below. Dad. The voice on the other end was a wreck. It was cracked and thin, stripped of all its arrogance. Dad. Thank God you answered. I have been trying to call for weeks, but I ran out of commissary credits. You have to help me. I took a sip of my tea. The steam warmed my face. I am listening, Jason. It is a nightmare in here, Dad, he sobbed. The public defender is useless. He says the feds have everything. The emails, the bank records, the testimony from Brittany. She turned on me, Dad. She told them everything to get a plea deal. She is going to get probation, and I am looking at 15 years. 15 years, Dad. I will be 55 when I get out. My life will be over. He paused, waiting for me to gasp, waiting for me to rush in and fix it. When I stayed silent, he continued, his desperation rising. You have to get me a real lawyer. A shark, like that Sarah Jenkins woman you hired. If I have a good lawyer, maybe I can get it down to 5 years in a minimum security camp. But I need money, Dad. I need a retainer. I know you donated the jackpot, but you must have kept something. You have your pension, right? Please, Dad. Just 20,000. That is all I need. I am begging you. I am your son. I closed my eyes. I pictured him sitting in a gray room wearing an orange jumpsuit the same color as the sunset I was watching. I pictured the man who had worn a $3,000 suit and laughed at a $1.50 ticket. Jason, I said softly, do you remember Father's Day? What Jason stammered, confused by the shift. Dad, what does that have to do with anything? Focus. I need money. Do you remember the call I made to you the Monday after our lunch? I continued, my voice hardening just a fraction. I called you because I was in pain. I told you my heart was failing. I told you I was scared. And I asked you for $500. There was silence on the line, the heavy breathing of a desperate man. You told me to sell your mother's watch, I said, looking down at the silver timepiece on my wrist. You told me to pawn the only memory I had left of her because you had cash flow issues. You did not care if I lived or died, Jason. You only cared that I did not interrupt your golf game. Dad. That was different, Jason cried. I was stressed. Richard was pressuring me. I didn't mean it. You meant every word I said. And now I mean every word I say. I gave you a chance, Jason. I gave you a test. It was a simple structural stress test. If you had given me that $500, if you had shown even an ounce of compassion, I would have shared the world with you. We would be here together right now watching the sun set over the volcano. But you failed. You chose greed over blood. Dad. Please, he wept, his voice breaking into jagged pieces. Don't do this. I am scared. I know you are scared, I said. And you should be. You have a lot of time ahead of you. I suggest you use it not to think about money or lawyers or plea deals. Use it to think about the value of $1.50. Use it to think about the cost of dignity. Dad. Wait, do not hang up, please, Dad. Goodbye, Jason, I said. I tapped the red icon on the screen. The connection severed. The sobbing stopped. The silence of the island returned, rushing back in to fill the space where my son used to be. I placed the phone face down on the table. It was over. The final beam of the old life had been cut away. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of salt and wild thyme. I was not alone at the table. Sitting opposite me was Thomas, a retired history professor from London, and Eleni, a local artist who painted the sea. They were not wealthy people. They did not wear designer clothes or drive luxury cars, but they were rich in stories, rich in kindness, and rich in spirit. They had been waiting patiently while I took my call, pretending not to listen out of respect. Is everything all right? Henry Thomas asked, his eyes full of genuine concern, not the predatory calculation I had grown used to in Chicago. Yes, Thomas, I said, smiling. Everything is finally perfectly aligned. I was just closing the last chapter of a very long book. Eleni reached out and poured more tea into my cup. Good, she said. The sunset is starting. You should not miss it for the past. The present is too beautiful. She was right. The sun was dipping below the horizon, turning the sky into a canvas of violet and gold. It was a stark contrast to the gray, miserable rain that had soaked me at the bus stop 3 months ago. That rain had felt like an ending. This sun felt like a promise. I looked down at my wrist. The Omega Seamaster caught the dying light, its crystal face gleaming. I unclasped it slowly. I held it in my hand, feeling its weight, its history. For 50 years, it had marked the time of my life. It had ticked through the birth of my son, the death of my wife, the betrayal, and the redemption. I brought the watch to my lips and kissed the cold metal. We are free, Martha, I whispered into the breeze. We are truly free. I put the watch back on, but this time it did not feel like a shackle to the past. It felt like a compass for the future. I picked up my tea and toasted the horizon. I was 78 years old. I had lost a son, but I had found myself. I had given away a fortune, but I had gained a life. As the first stars began to appear in the velvet sky above Santorini, I leaned back in my chair and let out a laugh. It was not bitter. It was not angry. It was the pure, joyful laughter of a man who had bet on himself and won the only jackpot that really matters. If you ever find yourself holding a ticket that others say is worthless, remember my story. Remember that your value is not printed on a piece of paper. It is written in your actions. It is built in your character. And sometimes the biggest win is not what you get, but what you are brave enough to walk away from. Thank you for listening to my journey. I am Henry Caldwell, and for the first time in a long time, I am exactly where I am supposed to be.